Hey everybody, this is Emily from Designlab Admissions. Thank you so much for joining us on our second Figma tutorial series dedicated towards working in auto layouts. Joining us today we have Kaio. He was also on our first Figma tutorial, so some of you may recognize him if you attended the first one. He's going to be over in the Q&A section answering questions, and then James is going to be our mentor presenting today on auto layouts. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. If for any reason you need to leave the presentation early, you will be getting a recording as long as you're registered. And if you do have questions, you can feel free to put them in the questions tab, which is right next to the chat tab over on the right-hand side of your screen. Lastly, if you're finding the chat distracting and you'd like to close it out or make the screen larger, there are two buttons in the lower right-hand corner to enter full screen mode and also collapse the sidebar. Cool. So we are going to get started. James is going to talk through some stuff in Figma and auto layouts for about 45 minutes. Kyle will be answering all of your questions if you have them. Please don't be shy about answering questions. We're more than happy to address them as we run through the presentation. And yeah, that's about it. So Kyle and I are going to disappear and James is going to take the space and we will get rolling. All right, everybody. Thanks so much and enjoy.
All right. So I'm going to jump right in. Today we're going to spend around 45 minutes just talking through talking through auto layout and also kind of talking through some best practices. I know a lot of students ask me about auto layout, so hopefully this will definitely help you in the foundations course. My name is James Horde. I'm a senior product designer at VMware. And today we're going to try to cover a whole lot. I'm going to go through an introduction on what I do, really kind of understand auto layout, what it is. And then we're going to walk through some common, like how to build a lot of the common design pattern elements. So from navigation to buttons, to list items, to cards. And then I like it to be more interactive. So definitely, if you have any questions while I'm kind of like going through how to build these on screen, definitely, let me know. All right, cool. So introduction. As I said once before, I'm a senior product designer at VMware. We're consultants per se. So I work on a balanced team. We work with a lot of large clients in a lot of different industries, from medical to automotive to retail. I've been working at Figma for 1.5 years. Before that, I was a sketch person, and I've been mentoring at Designlab for just a little over a year. Actually, it was a year 2 days ago. I'm excited and happy to be sharing my knowledge of Figma. I've worked a lot on auto layout. I know it can definitely be difficult to learn if you're not really familiar with, especially front-end development. Moving along, here are the common design patterns that I see a lot of students really struggle with understanding how to build an auto layout. I think navigation is where I'm going to start. And then I'm going to do simple buttons and then complex buttons, meaning buttons with an icon or some sort of visual element. Inputs are another area. I know within the course, you guys do a lot of forms. So I definitely want to cover inputs and cards. We all love cards. If we've ever been on Instagram or any of more modern applications, cards are definitely important to kind of understand how to lay out an auto layout. And then list, which common elements like a directory listing, or say an address book listing, where you're repeating multiple elements. I'm going to kind of cover that, understanding how to kind of nest components and auto layout. I'm not going to cover like components or styles or any of that in this particular presentation. And so I'm really going to try to keep it kind of built around auto layouts. You will see me do and use other elements like components, or I'm going to stay away from constraints. That's probably level 2, where you can mix and match auto layout and constraints together. But I'm going to try to keep everything within auto layout. But if you have any questions, definitely let us know. I'm definitely here to answer any questions that folks might have. All right. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into navigation as our kind of first kind of how-to. I've kind of set up a few things here. I'm going to do a mobile navigation menu, and then I'm going to do kind of like, the classic desktop navigation menu. And one of the things I wanted to kind of talk through is auto layout is it's a type of frame, right? So it's a frame, you have your normal frames, and then you have auto layout frames, and you can add or take it off, right? So it's like a setting. So I know a lot of students get confused on like, oh, well, auto layout, it's different. It's a setting on a frame, just like constraints is a setting on a frame. So it is a frame. And with that, a lot of the reasons why you would want to use auto layout is because you would want to keep things either consistent spacing or space things out a certain way, essentially to make things responsive, right? That's the main reason why you would want to use auto layout, right? And it helps you keep your designs consistent throughout. So whether it's desktop or mobile and vice versa, whether you're creating components that you need to use on both breakpoints or 3 breakpoints if you're counting tablet, it's a great way to do that. And so that's kind of like the definition of an auto layout. So a lot of times when you're starting out, you don't really think of things as responsive. You think of things as, oh, this is a static element and it should always stay in its place. The moment you try to move things, then those are more things you have to manage. So auto layout is created to make your life easier, and it's also created to make you more efficient as a designer. Right? So what we're going to do here is take kind of normal application for a mobile application desktop menu here and really analyze it. So one of the things I like to do with students is really analyze what you want to happen, right? So how do you want these things to interact with each other? So we have a hamburger menu off to the left. I think we probably want to keep that off to the left. We have a title, and then we have a search icon, and then we have a settings icon. And so that said, we probably want these things kind of spaced evenly apart within a frame. So what we would do is let's frame this selection. So I'm going to right click and go to frame selection. And later on, as I give the presentation, you're going to see me actually start to use key commands. And I highly recommend you use your key commands and learn them early on. Just going to save you so much time. Luckily, Figma has right click selection menu that helps that situation. But the more key commands you kind of remember and know, the more efficient you're going to be. All right, so we have this frame, and I'm going to name my frame. Let's just call it mobile navigation. All right. All right. So the first thing I would want to do here is probably add my auto layout. So the way you add your auto layout is to go off to your right-hand menu in Figma and just hit the plus button, right? So now we have this as an auto layout. one of the first things that Figma does, it tries to calculate the distance between those three items, right? So as we see here, we have this 122 pixels. That's where these items roughly were apart from each other, and Figma just kind of rounds to which one and rejiggers everything, right? So we're going to set this for this particular exercise to auto, right? Or you can set it to 0. And what happens is, if I was to resize this frame, as you see, Figma just figures out what the right spacing should be, right? And two things also happen with this. If we go over to our alignment and padding menu, you notice that we have these set as space between. And this is something that always gets lost when you're kind of setting auto layout, when you already have things kind of sort of in place. You can change this, right? So you can actually say packed, which what's going to happen is Figma's going to squeeze these things together. Since we have auto layout, we have this auto setting for spacing, right? It's going to squeeze these things together, and then it's going to require us to actually put a number in to actually a pixel number to actually space these things apart. So what's happening is it went back to the 122. We could put in any number we want, right? So this is a spacer between each of these elements, right? And if I was to go to auto, it would go back to kind of filling the space, right? Any questions around that? I know that can be kind of hard to kind of get your head around. So all Figma is doing here is just calculating what space needs to be between these items to space them apart within this frame. I'm going to go ahead and keep filling out this frame. So I like to use my frames as my background. And also you can set your padding, right? So if we wanted to say this could be 10 pixels. Okay. So now we have a simple mobile menu. All right. Cool. All right. Is there any questions around that right now? All right. Cool. So we're going to level up. Oh, what is the purpose of the packed option? Packed option is really just when you want to keep things together, right? So in this situation, we wanted everything to be apart. So I'm going to do another mobile navigation menu, and we're going to use packed, and we're also going to do a nested auto layout. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to option drag, which is duplicate this, and then I'm going to remove the auto layout around this frame, right? And what I'm going to do is take this settings icon and move it into the frame, right? And what I want to happen is I want my search icon and my settings icon to be together, but spaced out in between, right? So what I'm going to do here, let's go ahead and set this up. All right. So I'm going to select these two items, these two icons, and I'm going to frame that selection and then add an auto layout to that. All right. And these are packed together. The reason I want to do it because I want these to have a set space between each other. All right. Okay. So now I have, we're going to actually name this. Let's call it icon group. Okay, lack of a better name. All right. And then we have our text, and then we have our menu or our hamburger menu icon. All right. So what I'm going to do is add back in the auto layout here. And as you see, this is packed together, and that this is what I don't want to happen. I want this to be responsive. So I would love for this icon group to space out to the edge of my frame. So all I need to do is just go here and change this from packed to space between. And as you see, it reacts as it needs to. Right? So this is a different version with a nested auto layout. So we have icon group as an auto layout, and then we have our full menu as the auto layout. The reason you would want to do this once again is if you wanted to control, say I didn't want these to be so far apart, maybe I want 8 pixels. And you notice how everything responds. All right. Cool. All right. Any questions around nested auto layout, packed versus space between? Oops. All right. Moving on. So this is another kind of version of that. And what I'm trying to do is just kind of show common design patterns for like different elements that you might come across when you're laying out a page. So this is another one. This is another nested auto layout. Say you have these site links, and I'm gonna just kind of randomly move these around, and say these are all your titles of the sections of your website or your application. So what you would do is go in and select these. And the key command for auto layout, if you just want to go straight into auto layout rather than framing it and then adding an auto layout, is Shift A, right? And so if you do that, as you see, that it creates a frame and it automatically adds the auto layout, right? It also automatically calculates the space between all these items that would make them equal, right? So as you see here, it's packed, right? For this particular situation, it doesn't really matter, but I would probably set this to just be auto, which once again, it basically switches it from packed to space between. All right. So, is there any questions around that? Oh, okay, great. All right. So this is similar to what we did on the mobile navigation, where we'll have a nested auto layout, and we'll call this, let's call this links. All right. Then we have our logo. So we would select both these items, and then we could just add an auto layout directly. As you notice, something happened, right? So we have a 48 pixel space between the logo and our nested auto layout, but you notice the alignment is a little weird, right? So one thing with this padding and alignment little menu here is that you're able to change the alignment, right? So I want this vertically centered, right? And once again, I'm going to change this to auto so I can keep it fairly responsive, right? And that would be like your desktop menu, right? So once again, we're kind of building on as we go. Once again, try to always name your layers. It can get pretty hairy the more you go without naming everything. So let's call this desktop navigation. All right, cool. Also, don't forget to turn on your background and then add some padding. It's going to do 16 pixels. All right. And this is kind of a tip. The reason I use my frame as my background is one less element you have to manage. So if I had another rectangle inside this frame, whenever I resize the frame, I would have to resize the rectangle or have a setting for whether it's a constraint or an auto layout to make sure it actually size correctly, right? And so So yeah, was there another question on what was the purpose? I think we answered what is the purpose of the packed option. Yes, the site links are separate text boxes, and they are nested within the outer frame. So they have their own frame, which is I named links, and then the outer frame is just the whole thing together. Right. Cool. And how did I make the text links vertically centered? Yes. So when you have an auto layout, you have this option to reorient the alignment of whatever content is inside that frame. Right? Cool. All right. Oh, so how do I make the frame have a white background without adding a rectangle? Ah, great. Yes. So the way I did it was just selecting the frame itself. And every frame has the option to turn on a fill or off. So I'm going to remove it. This is the default state when you add a frame around things, but you can always just go and hit this plus button and then add whatever color you want, right? So you could make this whatever color you like. Right? You can make it a gradient. You could fill it with an image. But yeah, every frame has the option to add a background, whether it be color or image. Just gonna make this white. Cool. All right. Any more questions on like navigation, nested, auto layouts, alignments? No, I did not. I did not have. You don't need to frame your text before you add it to auto layout. One thing that I do highly recommend is this is a really great thing to remember. I'm going to do, that's a great question. I'm going to take this text frame, right? One thing to remember, I see a lot of students do this. Your line height is very important, and that really can throw off your auto layout. So I'm going to have this at something really high, like at 200%, right? Versus, let me know if you can see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to really show the difference here. And then I'm going to have this one at auto. Most people usually do auto as their line height. And this kind of gets into more of topography, but the moment you have your line height that is off, or you have your text box set to fixed size, that can throw your auto layouts off, right? So for instance, if I had this text box as a different width, like I'm manually changing the size of this text box, right? And then I have this site link with a very big line height. And then say I have, let's make a third one with auto width. I highly recommend using auto width. And if I was to auto layout these three and start to, my machine's kind of slowing down here, I apologize. So if I have these three items, I'm just going to hit Shift A to quickly auto lay those out. You see what's happening. These are all off just a tad. First one being because of the line height, which is taking up all of the frame, and these other two don't have the same line height, right? The other thing that's happening is if I was to add another link, you'll see it more. You can't really see it here. I'm just going to duplicate this one. That was Command D. And you might be able to see how auto layout is not quite correct on the middle one. Right, so if I was to remove, call this auto, change, you see how they're not spacing out correctly. Same thing if I was to change the alignment, because each of these text boxes are just a little bit different. Now, I noticed a lot of people will add frames around their text boxes and try to control it that way. That becomes really dangerous, because now you're managing you're managing a frame and an auto layout, and if it's nested, another auto layout, right? So you want to try to simplify the way you work whenever it's possible, right? So that was a great question around making sure if you're going to use text in auto layout, make sure you set it up properly, which I highly recommend just using auto width. And you can either use auto or make sure all your text has the same line height. Otherwise, it's going to throw all your spacing off. And the reason I use auto width throughout all my text, for the most part, is because whenever you're aligning things in Figma, this gets into another kind of a subject matter in Figma, which is general alignment. When you start to have different line heights on different text, and you're trying to space it away from like rectangles or other elements, it can throw your design off, especially if you're doing mobile applications and you're really trying to be really precise. Okay. Cool. Any more questions on setting up your text for auto layout? That was a great question. Cool. All right. So let's move on. And that's a great segue into buttons. This is probably, I cover this with every student, a best practice for creating buttons. So I'm going to do 2 buttons. So I'm going to do 1 button with auto layout, which is really simple. You can just frame your text. There's no frame around this text here. So I'm going to frame selection, add auto layout, and then turn on my background, and then set my padding. Right, and if I want, I can have border radius, 4. This is how I recommend you make your buttons. Everyone is different, but this, once again, eliminates you from having to create a rectangle. You can control the auto layout, so you can control the alignment of the text inside the button. So essentially, you want this to be centered vertically and horizontally. And then you also can control your padding independently of each other. So I put in 16, but I can have more padding on the left and right if I wanted to. Right. And the beauty of doing it this way is no matter what the text is inside my button, I can actually make sure that I always have that same kind of padding around my text. So if I was to duplicate this and call it Designlab button, as you see, I still have the same padding on the left and right that I set in my original button, right? Normally you would probably create a component and do it that way, but for this presentation, we're just concentrating on the auto layout, and you can see the power of just creating it that way. Right. Yes. I covered the Shift A, but I just wanted to go through it again for if anyone had missed it. The shortcut just to go straight into auto layout is Shift A, but it's really up to you. I highly recommend using key commands whenever possible. Right? Any questions around creating a simple button? Right. Cool. So this is kind of review. I think we kind of covered it on, you could do a button with an icon, right? So another thing to do, say you can have your icon here and you can just drop this into the auto layout and boom, right? So it's pretty simple. And as you know, I didn't need to create a nested auto layout for that because all the items, I just need them to be together. Now I could nest these if I wanted to control the distance between the text and the arrow, right? So I could take these two and Shift A for auto layout, and I could control the space between these two. Right? So that's one thing to kind of think about, right? Like, what do you want to control? That's why a lot of times when you're designing, once you get to a certain point, think about how do you want things to respond, right? Am I going to, if this is a responsive button, am I going to make it wider or make it shorter? Do I really care about the distance between these two items? Okay, cool. I have another question. Because we use of frames. Yeah. So, question about frames. Yes. Mostly everything inside Figma is contained in a frame. I mean, as you see, this text doesn't have a frame around it. It just floats out. Frames are a way to control your content, right? So I can have a frame within a frame within a frame, right? A little bit of inception there. So yeah, you have a frame, which would be like, we're going to go off on a tangent here. Say your device, say I have an iPhone 11, right? Now, say I wanted to use this mobile navigation here. I'm going to shift drag. Right? Now I have this frame inside this frame, right? So yeah, the question around frames is, yeah, you frame things that you want to control, and pretty much most things you do in Figma requires you to use frames. There are some instances where you would just group things. I rarely group things outside of logo elements, but pretty much everything is frames. And auto layout itself is a type of frame. It's a frame that has extra capabilities, right, that you turn on and off. So even auto layout itself, it's just a functionality added to a frame. I hope that makes sense. All right. So this was like how you would take these elements and add them to, say, a mobile device design, right? And I could, potentially take this button, and let's just change the background color on this. Let's use, let's make this accessible. All right. So I'm adding this frame. Let's call it buttons. Name our layers and our frames. All right. I'm adding it to the iPhone 11 Pro X frame. Within that frame, I have my mobile navigation, and then I have my button. All right. All right, cool. All right. Any questions around buttons and complex buttons? All right. And in another reason, before I move on to inputs, that you would want to probably use auto layout. It allows you to switch things around. So maybe I wanted this button to be on this side, or this icon to be on this side, or maybe it's a different type of icon. Right? It allows you to kind of move things around and keep them spaced accordingly. So if I'm on this side and maybe I want a little bit more space, I can do that, right? It's a quick, once again, it makes you more efficient. It's a better way of designing. Yeah, just makes your life easier. So cool. All right, so I'm going to move on to inputs. So I have these kind of broken apart elements of ways that you can do your input form fields. So I'm going to start with a very similar to how you create buttons. Just have this free form text here, right? Our placeholder text. And what I want to do is immediately just make my auto layout. So I'm going to hit Shift A. All right. And I'm just going to call this placeholder. And I'm going to add a background to that. And then I'm going to add a light stroke. Just going to use, let's use a 50% black for this particular exercise. As you see, there is some padding kind of set here. Don't really need a space between because I'm not putting any elements in there yet. And my text itself, I have it to auto width. Another thing you might want to do with your text, this doesn't really make a huge difference, but sometimes making sure your text is middle aligned within its own text box helps. And this is kind of like my input box, right? So it's super simple. Now, what starts to be the complication is if I wanted to say add in another element, right? So I could technically go ahead and add in a search. Maybe this is a search field now. Now I need to make sure I'm aligned properly, right? So I'm going to align this vertically off to the left, right? So now I have a basically input box that it's fairly responsive, right? So that it's as simple as that, right? An added benefit that you might want to do is, and we didn't really talk about this in the other examples. I don't know if we'll have time to really get into it, but resizing is very important. So up here on your right-hand menu, everything I've been doing has been hug contents, right? The reason I've done it because it gets kind of complicated when you start changing these settings. So underneath hug content, you have like a fixed width where the bounding box of your element does not respond to the outer frame, right? Hug contents means that the bounding box of this element will always shrink to whatever content's inside, right? So if I was to change this to typing in select entry of images or something, I don't know, right? You see that the bounding box changes, right? Now, I won't get too deep into that because it's fairly complicated once you start changing that, because it affects how these elements react to your outer frame, right? But just know it's there, right? So this is a placeholder for input box, right? Now let's do a second one where it becomes not an input box, but it becomes a drop-down button, right? A way to do that is to kind of use an icon. You can drop it in. And this is where I'm actually putting it inside the placeholder here, right? And you notice now the box kind of changed based off of the size of the icon. That is to be expected. Now, one thing I can do now, it's like, hey, like I really want this to be a drop down, so I want it to be off to the right. And I don't need the extra padding on top and bottom now, because this will hold the frame in place. So what you can do is select the placeholder frame, go over here to alignment and padding, and just remove the top and bottom. I'm using the tab key to go through. All right, so that's kind of like what I want. All right. Another thing to think about is I don't want to see the border of this icon show through here. Right? I want the outer frame to basically clip the content, basically cut off anything that's running too close to the edge. Right? So if I click content, now my button looks like it's inside the actual frame. Right? And the last thing I'll do to kind of make sure that this drop-down icon is all the way to the right, this is where I was getting into the resizing. I can select my text, and what I can do is have this fill the container. And what's going to happen is this text is going to say, hey, Figma is going to take the text, it's going to take the icon, and it's going to take the outer frame, and it's going to say, hey, text, you can fill out all the rest of the space until this icon gets to the edge of this frame. Right? And once you do that, this is what happens. Right? And once again, we're like, oh, this is what we want, but we have this padding off to the right. So you can easily select the placeholder frame and remove the padding. And now you have a drop-down menu. Any questions around that? I know that's a little complicated, but it's basically you're using the outer frame, the auto layout, you're using the text field, right? And you're setting this text field to fill up the space, right? And then the icon is just all automatically pushed to the right. That's all you're doing. I know it's a little complicated, but hopefully you guys got that. Any questions around fill container and auto layout? All right, let's see. No questions? Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, I know we're getting close to time. I'm going to kind of stop here and leave it up to general questions. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, cool.
Hey, everybody, I'm going to pop back on. Thank you so much for your presentation, James. It was super helpful. I can tell from the feedback that the students really appreciated it, and Kaio for being so active in the Q&A. Awesome. Well, we are going to look to wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody who came out and participated. We'll be sharing this recording in Slack, and we'll definitely be hosting another one of these webinars soon. So again, everyone, thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're located. Bye, everybody. Thank you.